Question number 4, James Shaw. Order, of course. Order to Mr Scott, who has a question later if he wants to ask it. Stop interjecting. James Shaw, question number 4.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and reads, does he stand by all his statements?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes, I stand by the statements I make.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
When he said on Radio New Zealand yesterday that he thought that between 5 to 10% of dairy farmers could fail, what specific advice, reports or evidence was he drawing upon?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I'd ask the member to table the quote where I said that.
I seek leave to table. Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, James Shaw.
I seek leave to table a link to the Radio New Zealand website.
No, well, I think it needs to be a bit...
which the Prime Minister is quoted.
I'm trying to help the member. It needs to be a bit more specific than that. If the member can table a specific order, well, I'm actually dealing with a point of order.
No, I can assist the House, Mr Speaker.
Well, that would be very nice.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave of the House to table a printout from the Radio New Zealand website entitled "Low Milk Prices Wiping Farmers Out" at 7:18 p.m. yesterday. That says Mr Key told me...
No. The document's been described on this case because there's quite a lot of discussion about it. I'm going to put the leave. It'll be over to the House to decide. Leave us sought to table that particular transcript, Radio New Zealand. Is there any objection? There is not. It can be tabled. Point of order, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
That's not a transcript, and Radio New Zealand corrected their story later on. I've never said that.
Order. The difficulty is I said when I... Order. Prime Minister. If you want to remain for question time, stop interjecting when I'm on my feet. The difficulty here is I took it to be a transcript and I described it... I described it as such when I put the leave. I therefore think you need to re-describe the document, and then I'll put the leave because the House has a right to know what they're agreeing to table.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave of the House to table a report from the Radio New Zealand website entitled "Low Milk Prices Wiping Farmers Out." Okay. Shall I give the time, Mr Speaker?
Well, you did earlier. It was 7 in the morning.
7:18 p.m.
7:18 p.m. Leave us. It's a report from the website. On that basis, I will still put the leave. It's over to the House what they decide to do. Leave us sought to table it. Is there any objection?
Yes, there is.
There is objection. Order. Order. Listen. The level of interjection is far too high. When I'm rising to my feet, calling for members to cease yelling at each other, they're not doing so. I'm looking for someone now to make an example of from anywhere in this House, and I won't hesitate to use that person for such a purpose. Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you. Mr Speaker, point of order?
Point of order.
Would you like, given that I didn't receive an answer to the question, would you like me to rephrase my initial supplementary question?
It's so long past, I think that might be fair. I'll allow the member to do so.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When he spoke on Radio New Zealand yesterday about the percentage of dairy farmers that could fail, what specific advice, reports or evidence was he drawing upon?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, in the way the member asked exactly the right question. The point I made yesterday is I don't know the numbers. What I said was the advice I'd had from the bank CEOs that I'd spoken to indicated it was a much smaller number than the 25% Radio New Zealand was presenting it as.
Thank you.
Supplementary question. Supplementary question, James Shaw.
So what exact number, or what number, not what percentage, is he expecting to fail from this dairy downturn?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I wouldn't have a clue. I mean, in the end, it's ultimately a matter between the banks and the individual farmers. There's no doubt that some farmers are likely to suffer and have foreclosure because that happens actually in any one given year, even in very high payouts. But I suspect that the numbers will be less than what people think because the banks are going to work very constructively with them as best they can.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How many small businesses is he expecting to fail as a result of this dairy downturn?
The Right Honourable Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
again, I don't know directly. I don't think anyone would know that number. But what I do know is the economy is growing strongly. Actually, business confidence is strong. Treasury predictions are that growth will be between 2.5% and 3%. The Reserve Bank themselves have indicated that they're growing more strongly. But I will say this, Mr. Speaker. The member represents the Green Party. They want to put a far higher ETS charge on farmers.
Mr. Speaker.
That certainly will make them go under.
Order. Point of order, James Shaw.
Sir, my question was fairly brief and it was a factual question. It wasn't, I think, broad enough to invite insults from the Prime Minister.
The question was brief and it was certainly answered in the initial part of the answer. There was no need for the Prime Minister then to drift into criticising Green Party policy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
How many rural retailers is he expecting to fail as a result of this dairy downturn?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, I don't know, but what I do know is that the economy is growing, it's creating jobs, unemployment is falling, regional growth has actually been strong around New Zealand, and it's a highly diversified economy. I mean, you have a record number of tourists coming to New Zealand, going to small and regional New Zealand, and overall, actually, business confidence has been very high. If you have a look at the indicators of right indicator, wrong indicator of where the country's going, it's significantly positive that the country thinks it's going in the right direction. So there are many factors in a highly diversified economy like we have. At the moment, dairy prices are lower, but beef prices are higher. Some years ago, kiwi fruit growers were suffering.
Order, the question's long enough. Or the answer's long enough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
James Shaw, supplementary question.
What is the scale of risk to Fonterra and the banks and the financial sector as a result of this dairy downturn?
The Right Honourable
Well,
Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, I don't have that information, but I do know that the Reserve Bank some years ago I think last year actually, did some modelling on a downturn in dairy prices where they looked at a 40% reduction in land prices and indicated the banks were resilient enough for that. We've seen virtually no reduction in land prices at the moment.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
To the Prime Minister, when a Federated Farmers poll shows that 11% of dairy farmers are under pressure from banks, when farm consultant Peter Fraser warns that 25% of farmers are vulnerable, and when the Reserve Bank advice predicts that up to 44% of dairy farm loans will become non-performing, and accounting software company MYOB says that up to 100,000 businesses will suffer, does he now think that this is a threat to the whole economy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
No, I don't think it's a threat to the whole economy. I think it certainly puts pressure on dairy farmers. But, Mr. Speaker, it's quite simple. If the member genuinely has concern for dairy farmers of New Zealand, then support TPP, support irrigation, support RMA reform, make sure you don't put ETS...
Order. I will hear the point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, my question was not about Green Party policy. It was about the risk to the New Zealand economy that the Prime Minister
when I consider the breadth of the question, it was a very long question. There was a lot of information the member took the opportunity to put into the question. It gives the Prime Minister a wider gambit in which to answer the question. Does the Prime Minister have any further to conclude?
Mr. Speaker, as I was listing, a series of different things which would actually help dairy farmers. There are certain things that the government cannot control, as I said earlier, commodity prices, the weather, exchange rates. But there are things that we can control as a parliament. So if this parliament wants to support dairy farmers, let's do the things that actually can support them. But as long as political parties oppose those things, then you won't be able to help them, and you shouldn't pretend that you are.
Question number